there, Mama. I'm Courtney Cecil, proud mom of two boys and an organizational culture and behavior change executive. And I'm a believer in building a movement to help the burned out, overwhelmed working moms reclaim their control and free time so that they can confidently remain in the workforce without losing their sanity or themselves. Now, let's get started. Hey, y'all, I'm your host, Courtney Cecil, and welcome back to another episode of the Life Management System. Inside this episode, I'm excited to host my first ever guest from South Dakota, Diane Sorensen. So, Diane has a background in early education and behavior science, but right now, and the reason she's here with us today is because she is here to inspire women to move from a place of reactivity to true connection in their relationships, whether that be with their parents or with their children or with others. So, Diane, welcome to the Life Management System. And
thank you, Courtney.
Yeah, so let's start. I mean, your place right now as a life coach and a hypnotherapy practitioner is a late stage career transition for you. And I would love for you to just start by helping share with the listeners what inspired you to make the transition into this type of work.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me here, Courtney. I'm so honored to be here talking with you and your listeners. So I am, first and foremost, I am a student of life, I like to say. I'm a lifelong learner, love just learning and growing. I am a wife, a mother, a stepmother, a grandmother, and I came to this work through my own personal crisis, which happened in motherhood. My children were my greatest teachers and still are, even now, even though they are now grown. And it was when my daughter, who was at the time a teenager, 17, went through a mental health crisis. And it was that experience that kind of cracked me open. And I realized over time how much pressure I was putting on myself and then unknowingly putting on my children. So I was the good mom, or I was the good girl who became the good wife, the good mom, the good teacher, all the goodness, and realized I was proving my goodness. I was earning love. And again, annoyingly put that on my children. So what happened was my daughter was self-harming, and her pain really mirrored my own internal pain, but hers was showing up on the outside where I could no longer ignore it. And that is what took me on a whole new path. And now I inspire other women to feel more empowered in their own motherhood and in their own life, and not have to earn love or prove their goodness.
I can't imagine how hard that would be, Diane, to witness as a parent. And what a vulnerable story that you just shared. And I would like to honor that vulnerability. It is a core value of mine. I think it is what changes lives. It is also what builds relationships, something that you were here to do both of. So thank you in the spirit of vulnerability for sharing that. And I just, there's no better purpose in life than being able to change someone else's. So I am just grateful that you have taken this and what could have been a very heavy situation and turned it into something that really is here for on behalf of the greater good of, of society. So thank you for doing that. And gosh, that is that must be tough.
Yeah, and the reason I share that story is because I know there are so many mothers out there who are so afraid of messing up, right?
Yeah.
And so I share this story to help women understand that we're all going to mess up in some ways, and our children are going to have their own journeys, and that parenthood truly isn't here to define us, but it is here to grow us. And I have grown in the most beautiful ways, and my relationships with my children and beyond that have grown in such beautiful ways. So I just want people to know that we parenting, it is not about being perfect and, trying to keep up with everybody else or looking perfect on the outside, because that's really the game I was playing.
Yeah.
And my life is so much more fulfilling now, and it's everything, there's all the ups and downs. But I share that to, just share the human side of motherhood.
hmm Yeah, because we're not perfect. So to your point, Diane, our parenting journey certainly won't be perfect. And I have been excited about this conversation too, as just as a learner myself, because I know, I mean, I consider myself a recovering perfectionist. I work on it every day to let go of the things that I really should let go of. It, but what's really hard for me is I see that in my youngest. He is an absolute perfectionist and loses himself if something goes sideways.
Mhm.
So it's a hard thing to navigate when you know that like, genetically speaking, they probably got that from you. But I think that this awareness of knowing or just being aware of the shadow we're casting is so important as leaders, as parents. So I'm really glad that you're illuminating the importance of it. So let's
Yeah.
talk about boundaries for a second. That is knowing that most of this audience probably relates to some form of perfectionism. That's probably why they're tuning in, because this really is a self-development type podcast. So they already have high standards for themselves, and people with high standards tend to struggle with boundaries. They are overgivers. In your words, Diane, they are self silencers. So, what would you say to the woman who is struggling with boundaries? Like, what's the first boundary you would recommend that she uphold and she put into place?
I like to call it boundary work, because that is what I do with women. I do boundary work. It is work. It is not simply setting some boundaries and then maintaining them. That can be really triggering because it's like, well, what boundary? How do I do this? And I was there at one point too. And it was so fascinating to me because I'm like, why? I'm hearing all this stuff about boundaries, and I started asking people, what are your boundaries? What do boundaries mean to you? And 100% of the time I got some type of version of boundaries. Well, like, what do you mean boundaries? Well, I'm not sure because I don't know what consequence goes with what boundaries. And so I realized, wow, there is a really misconception and not a lot of information we have about boundaries. And the reason is because our our social system did not teach us boundaries. We absorbed that perfectionism and all that. So it is work. So there's a lot of foundational pieces to it. And I think a lot of times we think of boundaries as this external thing. And a lot of the work that I do with women on boundaries is internal. So the first thing I work on with women is just turning our focus from shining the light out there on others. What are other people going to think? What do they feel about this? How are they going to react to me? To bringing that back to the I. What do I think? What do I feel? We become so disconnected. We live from, the shoulders up, they say, right? We live in our head, and we become so disconnected. It's like, I don't really even know what I feel. And so that's the first thing, to bring it back to the I and really take ownership of how I feel and allowing other people to feel whatever they feel. We are such caretakers of other people's feelings and experience. And there's that entanglement, and that keeps us powerless. So the first thing we work on is taking ownership of my own thoughts, feelings, and behavior, and allowing other people to have their own thoughts, feelings, and behavior without taking it personal for me.
Yeah, the thing that I often go back to is how much we live for others as opposed to living for ourselves. So, Diane, what I heard behind everything that you just said is the importance of being grounded in what's important to you. You like when you are in touch with your feelings, your emotions, what you care about, you're living for yourself instead of others, which is something that moms inherently suck at. It's like we are
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
selfless in the way that we show up, and that's beautiful, but also what tends to burn us out. And you actually said, I wrote this down. You said we absorb the perfectionism. And I am assuming that there's some element of perfectionism, of living for others, that actually leads to burnout. So if somebody feels like they're heading in that direction, what would you recommend as the first step to interrupt that pattern?
Yeah. So you said it that we are so selfless. And so the first pattern is to be a little bit more selfish, actually, which, some people are like, whoa, I can't be that. I'm not selfish. And to be honest, I didn't even have access to selfish because I was so selfless. And really, to be honest, being selfless is really actually selfish because what we're doing is we're manipulating, we're actually regulating others in order to regulate ourselves. And this happens especially with our children, but it will happen with others too. So I grew up with the message, and nobody told me this, of course, but just I got the message behind the actions and the attitudes of whatever you do, don't upset anybody. So that created really an eggshell environment and the beginnings of being perfect because I had to figure out, okay, what are they going to think and what are they going to feel and how they're going to react and what do I need to do? Who do I need to be so that it's all okay? And so interrupting that pattern of selflessness and coming back to prioritizing you because you cannot give to others without a foundation of filling your own cup.
Yep. And what I often tell my clients is you have one life to live. Like, this is yours. You're not going to get a do-over. So it's just so important you step into that as opposed to living it for other people again.
Yeah, a big
Um,
thing for me is I say I'm recovering from the addiction to approval.
mm,
I mean, I totally was addicted to approval. I was a total people pleaser, perfectionist, codependent. And it makes sense because when we're young, we are trying to gain, a lot of us, the approval of our parents and doing whatever it is we need to do to gain their approval so they're not mad or upset or disappointed. And so that becomes a pattern, a habit, and it served us when we were young. It kept us, uh, contained and out of trouble. But though that same pattern as an adult, it becomes the seeds of self-sabotage. We're
mm,
continuing to use that protection, and now it's starting to disrupt our lives and our relationships.
yep.
So I practice every day, and I help women I work with practice truth over approval,
I love
truth
that.
over comfort. And even, today, I go through my days and I'll catch myself. Am I saying what I'm actually mean, or am I saying what is going to be comfortable?
Mm.
And so really practicing saying what I mean, instead of saying what's comfortable or staying silent.
Yeah, I love that, addicted to approval. So my youngest I talked about, he is 8.5 and an absolute perfectionist that I'm just so conscientious of how I show up for him to because I don't want to fuel that. And then I have my oldest who's 10 and he just doesn't care. So I asked him, he came home on Monday and I was really proud of him for this, but he said, Mom, I got silent lunch today. I was like, well, let's just start by honoring the fact that you actually felt like you could tell me. And I appreciate that about you. And to, you should tell me more. Like, why were you in silent lunch? And it turns out he kept turning around and looking at the table behind him and talking, which is very, very typical of his personality. And at the end, I said, Witten, what did we learn from this? And he said, well, not really anything. I'll probably do it again tomorrow. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay. And I was like, so it didn't bother you that that your brand is at risk? And he was like, not really. And he continued to say, I care about getting in real trouble. And I was like, well, define real trouble. He said, like a student alert. I don't want to get a student alert. But he goes, that's fine. And I was like, wow, if I
Mm.
only had an ounce of his I don't give a shit, I would have been so much more peaceful because similar to you, Diane, I was addicted to approval. I needed that validation, and to your point, particularly from my parents. And that's why I think it is just so important that the way that I show up for my youngest, as somebody who is also addicted to approval, that I am very gracious with him and encourage him to lean into the mess. So I would love to take it in that direction.
I love how you said too that you have two children who are the opposites. And
Yeah,
it usually works this way. It
yeah.
usually works where we have one approval seeker and one rebeller. And I love how you are just, it's not about, oh my goodness, I see perfectionism in my child and I need to stop this because that is just fueling the pattern. It's really about recognizing, oh, I recognize this pattern and just sitting in it with them,
Mhm.
allowing them to experience whatever they're experiencing without taking it on ourselves. And you said such a beautiful question. Tell me more. That is
Mhm.
such a beautiful question. When they can come back to you and tell you about their experience, that is wow, that is beautiful that they're telling you he's trusting you enough to tell you about his experience. And then you didn't go into, oh my gosh, well, this is what you need to do. You actually got curious and
Mhm.
asked him about what that meant for him. That is really a beautiful exchange.
Thank you. I work hard on that. But I also come from a background of culture shaping. So in the
Mm,
culture shaping space with inside organizations, curiosity is one of the most foundational principles of assuming positive intent, and building relationships with other people. It's what builds trust. It's what builds credibility. It's what builds empowerment. And those same principles absolutely apply at home or absolutely apply in our day to day relationships. Because when you come from a place of curiosity, it honors the relationship and gives space to say, hey, you're essentially saying that's not how I would approach it. How like help me get in your head. But
right.
it
And
really
you're not,
does.
yeah, you didn't project how you would
Exactly.
do it onto him.
Exactly.
That is the
Yeah.
key.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for seeing that.
Yeah,
So
and I also comment on, how you said you're doing this culture shifting with your work and bringing it into the home. That's what I think this work is all about. It's about integrating it into all areas of our life and not just siloing different things. So anyway, I
yeah,
just wanted to make that point too.
thank you. Yeah, for anybody that is listening that has not read Stephen Covey's Seven Principles of Highly Effective People, I will link it in the show notes. But that is, I mean, a lot of the work that I do with inside organizations pulls from very similar principles of Stephen Covey's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. But furthermore, we actually send my boys to a leadership based school that is built on those seven habits. So we are really indoctrinating that language inside our home. And it helps us be able to speak the same language, but it also helps teach them executive functioning skills as early as kindergarten when they start at the school. I'll link it in the show notes. I'm a big believer in Covey's work,
Yeah,
but
and leadership is so important. Like I didn't grow up thinking I was a leader. I mean, at all. Even when I was teaching, I was thinking of myself as a leader, of course. And now it's like, oh, of course, we're all leaders. We're
yeah,
self-leaders. And that's what we
yeah,
need to do first, right? To be
yeah,
effective. leaders in the world. So
Yeah, exactly. In fact, it's ironic you say that, Diane, because when I am facilitating inside an organization, the very first question I ask before I get started, I said, I'll say, and I'll make it seem unassuming. I'm like, hey, who's a leader in this room? Can anybody who's a leader raise their hand? Just to just to see
yeah,
whether or not they process leader as something that they get to do, or if it's something that somebody else does because of rank. And
yes,
almost always, I would say like at least 80% of the time, the people that raise their hands are the ones that are actually in executive level roles, as opposed to the other people who are completely missing the point that the way they show up every day, regardless if it's as a parent, as a professional, or as a member of their community, they are a leader. They get to choose the way they show up. They get to choose to lead.
yeah. And that's what I try to inspire mothers to lead their children in this new way, where the goal isn't they do what I say. I mean, sometimes they need to, it's just,
Yeah.
but the goal is to that they have agency over, their own self, and they become their own leader. Because a lot of me, I'll say me, I grew up, I really didn't learn to think for myself. It was, well, what do you think? And
Mhm.
just do what I say. Just listen. And yeah, I just didn't learn to trust myself. I didn't learn to think for
Mhm.
myself or trust myself. So I really had to learn that I need to think for my own self, and make decisions, because that's
Mhm.
really hard for some of us, right? To be decision makers because we're so afraid of not doing it right.
Yeah, well, we're afraid of not doing a lot of stuff right. Some of it's
Right.
stuff that we are doing for ourselves, for our own lives, and some of it's for our kids. I mean, my sister she's in Atlanta, and she belongs to a church, and her small group had a whole session, like a whole semester series around the way our parents messed us up. And I mean, they meant it tongue in cheek, because a lot of it was implying we have agency to make decisions. We have agency and accountability over how we live our life. We are not victims of that. And yet, naturally, we are developed by the way our parents raise us, by the way or the environments we're exposed to. But as parents, I know a lot of the women that I work with carry their weight in that very strongly. They take their responsibilities as parents very seriously, and they're afraid of messing up their kids. So
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit about what's your read on where that fear comes from and how you might help women move through it instead of being consumed by that guilt or that level of severe responsibility.
Yeah. And so one thing I heard you say was how our parents messed us up. And so I think a lot of time, what does that mean? How are you messed up? I mean, right? Like, how are we perceiving ourselves, and what is not messed up? So if I didn't have a messed up kid, how would they be? Perfect? I
Mhm.
mean, so really this goes back to our relationship with messing up, and actually our relationship with ourselves. Oftentimes I think we do cycle breaking moms say things like, I don't want to do it the way my mom did or my parents did. I don't want my kids to feel like I did. But these patterns are so ingrained, we don't know what to change. And sometimes we
Mhm.
go all the way over to the other extreme, which isn't helpful either. So if we're worried about messing up our kids, we're really coming from a place of fear and anxiety, and we're parenting from that place, and that our children absorb that. So it's really building self-trust, self-acceptance, learning to love ourselves, because that's kind of really what we didn't learn. We didn't learn to love ourselves. And so when we have self-acceptance and we let life be messy, like your child came home and said, Yeah, I had to be in silent lunch or whatever. I mean, that's a mess up, right? And he gets to learn from that. And he's like, I'm going to do it again. And he's going to learn from that again. That is allowing life to be messy. And I will tell you, I went from, from no mess, there can't be any mess ups, to allowing mess in my life. And it is so much more fun. And so it goes back to the perfectionism of being afraid of and not trusting my own self. So that is part of the boundary work again that we work on is coming back to ourself instead of focusing so much on our children in how they're going to turn out. We need to bring that back to ourselves and focusing on, how do I want to feel? And what are my needs and my desires? Because a lot of times we lose that. We lose, we're so focused on how our children are going to be, what they're going to achieve, doing everything for everybody and looking like we have it all together. Like we don't even know what we want
Yeah.
or need. We don't get any gold stars for loving ourselves
Yeah.
or meeting our own needs, but it truly is where we need to come back to. What didn't you get that you needed in childhood? And for most of us, it's that emotional support
Mhm.
because we just didn't have it back then. And I will tell
Yeah.
you, I parented from a place of emotional immaturity. I didn't have those
Well, it's your
skills
first time
back then.
parenting, Diane. That's the thing.
Yeah,
Like with all of us, it's our first go at it, and then once we get to look back, it's just so much easier to be like,
right.
wow.
And
Um,
nobody was talking about emotional intelligence. I mean,
yeah.
science hadn't even caught up yet with that. So I just own it. I mean, and I think that is another really important piece. Awareness is first, and then ownership. Just owning your own experience. And
Mhm.
that's really very liberating because then we don't have to hide, behind these insecurities and pretend like we have it all together. Because who the
Mhm.
hell has it all together? None of us.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So, in what you just said, you talked about how much we tend to focus on our kids' achievements, which leads to us often losing ourself. You talked about self-acceptance, you talked about self-trust. It's just so easy for moms to lose themselves in this whole parenting journey. So, how would you help somebody reconnect with what's beneath all of that, like who they really are when you peel back the layers of the roles, whether that be the working professional or whether that role be them as a parent or them as a spouse? What would that reconnection look like?
Yeah. And it's really, again, coming back to really, it's a remembrance of who we were before the world told us who to
Mm,
be. And so it's reconnecting within, connecting in our body. And it takes a practice. This is a process, a practice of getting still with ourselves and really noticing what's happening in my body. Um, when I first started this work, I mean, I read, when I started reconnecting with my body, it's like, holy crap, I'm really anxious. And I had no idea I was anxious. I would never have said I was an anxious person because I didn't know what it was like not to be anxious. So this coming back to my own internal process and what is going on inside my own nervous system. Again, it's coming back to the I instead of being so focused on out there.
mhm.
It's coming back to here. And what do I think? What do I feel? What do I want? And as adults, it is our job to give ourselves, again, what we didn't get and needed in childhood. It's our job to meet our own needs and our own wants. Yes, we can ask for help, and that's another part of our job is asking for help, finding resources, what is available to me, who can help me. Um, and again, just taking ownership of our own experience. And Going for ownership really is the opposite of blame. And that's why it's so liberating, because if I'm blaming somebody else and I'm powerless, I don't have any control of my life. And that is a habit too, a pattern, that this blame. If we don't blame our parents, then it's the system's fault. There's somebody to blame. And it doesn't have to be about blame. It can be just owning my experience and moving forward from here.
Yeah, it's really easy for us to stay in victim mode as
Mhm.
opposed to recognizing what agency we have over rewriting the future, essentially. Well, Diane, thank you so much for your wisdom. I would love to move on to the lightning round questions, which I ask every guest.
Mhm.
So the first is, what is your go-to stress busting activity?
My breath,
Ooh, yeah.
breathing,
Yeah,
deep
it's
breathing.
something I certainly underestimated how powerful it was until I started doing it. And now that's one of my first reminders to all my clients who end up in a more frenetic energy state.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
okay, what's your last book or podcast that you loved?
The last book that I read recently was Facing Codependence by Pia Melody, her updated version. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
One that you'd recommend?
Yes.
Okay. If you could wave a magic wand, what task would you eliminate forever?
Approval seeking.
Oh, yep. I mean, I get
Yeah.
it. And it's,
Yeah. Because
yeah,
it's so exhausting.
yep. It is. It is. And again, to take it full circle, it means you're living for somebody else, not for yourself.
Yeah.
Um, okay, Diane, last but not least, you've got a podcast yourself. You are online. Help people learn how they can reach you.
Yeah. So I would love for you to come on over to the Chaos to Connection podcast. I am on Instagram also at dianesorensen.eb. All my links are there. It's all
Yep.
in my Instagram. So come on over to Instagram too. Let me know what you took away from this episode. I love to interact with people. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, Diane, thanks again for being here. And friends, thanks for tuning in. And if nobody's told you lately, if you didn't hear it from Diane and I enough today, you're doing a great job. You've got this, mama. Hey, friend, thanks for tuning in. Add the Life Management System podcast to your favorites so you don't miss my practical, snack sized tips to help you manage the mental load and create a life that works for you. If we're not yet connected on Instagram, come say hi at Working Moms Movement for daily inspiration. And if this is your third or 10th time listening, it's time you bless the small business. Share this episode with another working mom in the thick of it and take 30 seconds to rate and review. It helps more than you know. And if you're ready to go from surviving to thriving and make your day to day actually sustainable, email me at Courtney@workingmomsmovement.com. Mention this podcast for 25% off my coaching services. I also speak and host workshops for organizations that want to support working parents from the inside out. Reach out if you think yours is ready. This has been the Life Management System, your shortcut to less chaos and more calm. And here's your reminder to keep managing your life instead of letting it manage you.